The lovely thing about both NFV and about MEC is it's the ITization of telecoms.
You need to gather around the table with a shared view on how to approach a new opportunity or solve a common problem. And that's exactly what the MEC members have done.
If you move the cloud service to a cloudlet close to the edge, now 5G becomes valuable.
By pushing compute out towards the edge, that's something that's very hard for the large over-the-top providers to do, and that gives rise to a whole new set of services that you cannot implement if you have to backhaul everything.
It's very easy for software developers, for third parties to design new applications, and it's that that really is the transformative opportunity.
Services are starting to materialise that before really, you think, oh, that's too hard, I can't do it, because take all this stuff back, I get latency, I get packet loss, I get jitter.
The network is already starting to scale at the edge based on what the consumer can actually do.
5G needs mobile edge computing to succeed.
We really need to think of a completely different way of building apps, building solutions, and I think the edge compute capability allows us to do that.
It's the value-added layer on top of our network, and for us it's a key part of our strategy to make sure that we highlight the benefits that the network can bring to ordinary people or to corporate customers.
Hello and welcome to this TelecomTV super panel sponsored by Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Intel, and welcome to this exotic location. It's a repurposed industrial space directly adjacent to the on and off ramp for the 101 freeway over the Bay Bridge in San Francisco. Quite a place. But seriously, it's a really good trendy space, very loft-like, very New York, even though we're on the West Coast. And welcome to this evening's presentation and super panel, which is about multi-access edge computing, MEC, and it's entitled The Edge of Reason for Service Providers, and we'll see whether the ensuing few minutes drives us to the edge of reason as well. We'll hope for the best. This venue is actually really quite nice, and it's interesting that it's a modern art. It's called the Terra Gallery. It's a modern art place, a display of modern art, and it's also a wedding venue. I'm not going to say anything about the institution of marriage, but I am going to just give you a couple of quotes from people who've been talking about modern art over the past few years. Tom Stoppard, the British playwright, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead and all that, and said, "Skill without imagination is craftsmanship and gives us lots of useful things like wickerwork picnic baskets. Imagination without skill gives us modern art." Bit harsh. PJ O'Rourke says, "Like most sensible people, I lost instant interest in modern art about the time that Julian Schnabel was painting broken pieces of crockery that his wife had thrown at him for painting broken pieces of crockery when he should have been redecorating the bathroom." Anyway, this is no place for levity, as Mr. Hardy said to Mr. Laurel. And let us start the evening, and let me begin by introducing to you our panel, a panel of true, genuine experts who really know what they're talking about. We're going to be getting into the edge of reason in a moment. Before we do, let me just begin by, on my far left there is Alex Resnick, who is the ETSI MEC Chair, Enterprise Account Architect at HPE, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Next to him, excuse me, is Sanjay Aligari, Senior Solutions Architect, Telecommunications and NFV at Red Hat. Welcome. Thank you. Next to him is Axel Klauberg. I beg your pardon, no, it isn't. It's, it's Christos Kolias, who is Principal Research Scientist, Orange, co-founder of NFV ETSI and ONF's Wireless and Mobile Working Chair Group. Quite a mouthful, is that? Now we'll get to the right one this time, to Axel Klauberg, VP Aggregation, Transport, IP, CTO, ATI, Architecture, Deutsche Telekom. And then next to me is Keith Despain, who is Director of Business Acceleration Network Platforms Group at Intel. Gentlemen, welcome. Finally got your names in the right order, which is a start. But let's make a proper start. Let's begin by positing this. There's a pressing need for MEC to be made available across all access networks, all the way from today's LTE through to the 5G of tomorrow. And the same need applies equally to wireline and wireless LANs. Now, vendors from both the telecoms and enterprise sectors are deeply involved in the development of edge computing solutions, and enterprises remain a vital and lucrative market for telcos and CSPs. But enterprise IT buyers are knowledgeable and wary customers, and they will buy into new solutions only when and if they are sure that the promised benefits of increased investment are real and quantifiable. This has led to much debate about where the network edge actually is and how far it extends into the core. Because it seems to me the more people you talk to, the edge varies according to what they think it is. And I would like to begin by asking Alex to start with, where is the edge and where's the core?
Yeah, so thank you for beginning with me. I actually get that question quite a bit, and I just got it a few minutes ago there, and I was thinking, what's the right stupid analogy? A bunch of years back, I was watching a cartoon with one of my kids, and there's two animals in Africa, and one of them says, "What's snow?" The other one picks up a rock and says, "Well, you see this rock? It's completely different." And so my definition of the edge is, look at your data center. Start moving towards your user. As soon as you've left the data center and it feels completely different, you're at the edge. And you can be in a lot of very different places there. But as soon as you've closed that door of the data center, or your CO that has now become a data center, and it feels different, then you're at the edge.
Thank you. Anybody, anything to add to that? Christos, you're looking slightly quizzical and nodding at the same time.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I was going to say, actually, whatever is like one hop away from the end user, and doesn't really matter what the definition of edge is, right? I don't think it really matters. But whatever it's like outside the core and closer to the user, that for me is completely, the definition for edge.
I think indeed it's defined by the applications you're serving. And here, obviously, with the speed of light being a limiting factor, latency is the critical factor. And latency decides how far you go out, typically towards the edge. That's assuming you have a fiber plant, and bandwidth is not the cost driver in this space, obviously.
Keith, how about you? What do you think?
Well, I think it's been stated. The closer you get to the user, you get to that opportunity where you give them an experience that deals with latency and allows you to solve their problems in a way that they haven't been able to experience it before. Otherwise, if we don't push out to the edge and move that compute capability there, we're going to have some very unhappy customers. And they're going to start looking around for who else is going to solve their problems, who else is going to build a better edge computing experience for them. And I think that as we look at this market and it moves closer to there has to be, as we've talked the last half hour or so, as we got to know each other, a monetary way to receive the investment, the return that we want for that kind of an experience. And so the edge can be all the way out to the consumer, but if it's not getting paid for and it's not being driven by that, the edge is going to quickly fold in on itself.
Good point. Sanjay?
Well, you could have I almost see you could have two different kinds of edges, because there's the edge that is, as Alex was saying, you push it out from the data center on the network side and push it all the way. Do you push it to a central office, or do you push it further out and say, it looks like a data center, it's just smaller and smaller and smaller? Or do you say the edge is really almost like some are talking about, the edge inside the mobile network and in the cloud RANs and things like that, and I'm going to do something in there and do some interesting things in there. And those types of edges are very different, and I think those are, you're talking about very, very low latency and totally different types of applications. So I think it really depends on the application you're looking at.
Mobile edge computing has transmuted into multi-access edge computing. What's the difference between the two? Go on, Keith, have a go at that.
I think it goes to the word choice that you're using. Mobile in the wireless network and able to move around to multi-access it's no longer dependent on just being a mobile architecture. People are doing this with their cable providers that are looking at how do they make that happen. So I think it was proper to move towards more of a ubiquitous terminology. It just happened to be they both started with the letter M, so that made it much more convenient for the rest of us who live in the world of acronyms here in the telco world.
Very true. Anybody anything else to add to that?
I'll add to that. I think that change has been driven in some sense by ETSI, by the renaming of ETSI's group, and really what it reflects is the initial work in ETSI was driven by the mobile community. I think it's an indication of how important this topic is to the mobile community, that this is where it was driven out of. But eventually, so there was a real focus on the mobile networks. I think as we in ETSI sort of took a look at the end of our first 2 years of what we were creating, we kind of said, well, this is really applicable to any kind of edge computing or edge computing at any kind of an access, be it a Wi-Fi access or a fixed access. And so there's no reason to limit to mobile, and then therefore for PR reasons we had to change the name and find something else that started with the letter M.
Okay, can we move on then? We've hammered that one. Let's talk about the use cases. What use cases do you think will warrant CSP's investment in what is deemed to be one of the key building blocks to 5G? Who'd like to start? I'll pick one then.
Well, edge computing is definitely a key building block for 5G. When you look at the goal to offer various networks in one, to offer network slicing, here edge computing plays a key role. Also for offering low latency services, you definitely need to have edge computing. Now the interesting question is, what are the real use cases? What are the killer applications for this space? Typically you hear topics, AR, VR. Indeed, there are nice demos people are using today, what you could do if you would use edge computing, for example, to render a video stream per user in a VR scenario. Now, challenge is who will pay for that? Will the user value this service and pay something for it? Gaming might be an easier one, because typically people are willing to spend there. Especially for 5G, also the car industry is an interesting use case, also for edge computing. And there might be lots of things we didn't even think about. So I think this is like a future developers community which will build around edge computing once it really exists.
Sanjay.
So I really think that in addition to the use cases that Axel talked about, as if the interfaces are kept open, there could be this tremendous remixing of technologies where you get totally new use cases. So you know, think about you think about like the healthcare industry, for example, right? I mean, they need to get monitoring of different kinds of devices from, very quickly from different kinds of things, but they got to integrate with so many other things that it's not just really one use case. So it's got to, communicate with so many other different systems. So developers would sort of mash up location-based services with the sensor data, with the location of vehicles and other types of things, and try to put it all together. So it could be a really interesting landscape.
Thank you. At the same time, as we talked earlier about, has to be secure. You're going to talk about healthcare and patient information that has to be ubiquitous across, whether it's all the way back at the data center or all the way out to the edge.
Yeah, and so when you talk about security, you know, that brings up the question of, you know, for the longest time, you know, all these devices, we've talked about them as, oh, they're embedded systems. You know, they're not computers, they're embedded systems. No, they're computers. And so what operating system are they running? We have to start thinking about that. We have to start thinking about patching, upgrading, all of that, and how we manage all of that. So those are the questions that need to be asked in order to keep them secure.
Christos, Axel said his piece from a Deutsche Telekom perspective. What about you from Orange?
Yeah, so I mean, I totally agree with what was said. And I would probably add to that, and I think you alluded to that a little bit, on IoT. So actually IoT is one of my use cases. I'm working on an open source platform for mobile edge computing. And so looking to see how IoT, and that's how I got involved in this space because of the IoT use case, and also anything that has to do with, again, low latency, CDN and video caching is going to be huge. I see also an opportunity for security. If you look at things like maybe blockchain, you know, they can be implemented at the very edge of the network. So instead of like allowing, you know, these any security attacks to happen in the core of network, maybe these can be, you know, stopped at the very edge of the network before they affect any further the network and any potential other threats. So it's going to be a multitude of use cases. Of course, we're waiting for the new use cases that might, you know, emerge. And you're going to have, you know, the millennials, as I said earlier today, that might be pushed for this type of use cases. Same way that we saw Uber and Airbnb, you know, emerging over the last few years with, you know, respect to 4G, for instance. So I think there'll be a multitude of use cases. I mean, for us, as from operator point of view, is again how we can monetize this. You know, are there going to be new services that we can design around these, and how we're going to monetize that, and what it means for the operators that have already installed infrastructure, right? What's going to be the migration path? This is something that's going to be totally replacing how we, you know, operate today in terms of central offices, or is going to be something, you know, has to be added on? So that's a big question mark for me.
Okay. Well, I think you brought out an interesting point around monetization of it, and I think this is the one on my mind a lot, is who's going to win. This is the new battleground out at the edge. I think the cloud and what's being done with the large data centers, the centralized organizations, that's behind us. We know who the winners are in that space, and there are some, depending on where you are in the geographies around the world, but certainly here in the US we know quite well. But the edge and how things are pushing out to that edge, this is the new battleground. And I think carriers have a distinct advantage on some sides, and a lot of downside if they don't move or if they don't react very quickly. And I just throw that out there. I mean, but we had a great talk. How you monetize that is tough, and if you don't, and if you don't make the move, you're going to get left behind. Somebody else is going to figure it out and come along.
Yeah, fully agree with you. It's a major transformation actually hitting this industry. And sometimes if we're asking ourselves why the progress of network function virtualization is actually much slower than it was originally expected when we founded the ETSI ISG on NFV almost exactly 5 years ago. Well, it's not only a technical transformation, it's also a process transformation which is required, and the industry is definitely not there yet. And this is the difficulty. We need to move fast, because what you're seeing already in the market is that a lot of the web scale companies are moving towards the edge as well. So I still believe for a CSP, this is a unique opportunity, and we have to act and address that.
Yeah, I will say though, the difference between NFV and MEC is NFV to a very significant extent is an internal transformation of a telco industry that has to happen, but it is internal. MEC, as you guys have all pointed out, and I completely agree with it, is the new battleground between the telco industry and the web players, right? And I do think that it's a battleground where the telco industry has certain advantages as compared to what happened previously, but those web scale guys, they are moving in, they are going to move aggressively, and so they're creating a forcing function which may perhaps make it force the industry to move faster on MEC than it did on NFV, just because there is that external forces.
Yeah, we don't want this to become a battleground. So I think this is a great opportunity indeed for partnerships, also with the web scale companies. And I would like to avoid, as I'm more a pacifist from my mind, the term battleground. We're not there yet.
I agree. Spoken too strongly, but it is that space of new opportunities where people are carving out new pieces of pie.
Yeah.
Right. And those who wait too long will see their pie somewhat smaller.
Well, I see the willingness also from the web scale companies to partner in this space. When we look, for example, at the Telecom Infra project, I'm currently chairing the board of TIP, so I have to mention this, where Intel and Telefonica are co-chairing the edge computing project group. You actually see a lot of willingness also from Facebook as example to contribute in this space. And I think indeed it is an opportunity for partnership.
I think there's always willingness to partner and to look for the win-win in business until money's on the table. And the hands start reaching in for it and grabbing who's going to get the 100 and who's going to get the 5. And that, I think, is really when I use the term battleground, is what is going to be up over, and it's going to be fascinating over the next 15 years. I don't think it's going to happen immediately. It's going to take some time. But I do think that the money, the pot of money that's at the table is going to be determined by the foundation technologies and business strategies that the comm service providers put in place to either protect themselves or find ways to make the money that the others can't, just because of their location, their real estate, whatever they have that are their advantages for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but on the topic of the pot of money, right? The pot of money always is bigger if you don't have the battleground and you have openness and people collaborating. Even though it seems like, oh no, I want to own this myself, right? But then the pot is smaller, even though you have a bigger chunk of it. So that's, I think, the challenge here, to get, if people get together and come to some sort of agreement on how to define what workloads or what standards around what workloads can go out to the edge, whether it's TIP or whether it's the Etsy or whatever, right? I mean, the point is...
But I think that's one of those interesting ones that if you were to talk to we call them the web scale, you talk to over the top, you call the cloud vendors, they don't care. Yeah. They're going to try and solve the user's problem, end user's problem, whether it's enterprise or the consumer side of things, and they're going to go after it and not be patient or not necessarily wait. And now they're going to talk, and we at Intel work with them a lot around how they can be more friendly in their standards and offer more to the open community, but they're tough. They're going to go after it. They want that pot of money, in my opinion.
Definitely, but they also value the openness. I can tell you a story back from the past when we developed the first concepts which led to edge computing back in 2013. We were talking to some of the web scale companies indeed on a partnership. And they said, well, it's kind of a nice idea, but if all of the telcos come up with their own design here, we will never do it. We need agreement and open interfaces to actually work on that. And the industry is not there yet. So we have to keep that in mind as well. And if we don't get together, if we don't solve the problem, indeed, other players will move and will create facts.
I would ask then, given what you've just been saying, how are they going to do that? CSPs have the ACE, they're holding the ACE all the time, which is a network which has been out there forever, and you have an immense amount of power, you've got an immense amount of data that you can use. There's been a lot of talk recently, as we were talking about off camera before, about the fact that some OTT players, or whoever they may be, web scale people, could actually force CSPs out of business and out of the value chain completely. How would they do that? Is it even feasible that they could do that? Christos, what do you think?
For the over-the-top players, you mean? Or yeah, I think it is feasible, right? And it's probably, you know, I mean, if you have a lot of cash, right, it comes back to money again. You know, it's not for everybody, right? But if you look at some of the over-the-top players, if they see that as a way to monetize that and going back to money again, I think they can do it, right? I mean, if you look at Facebook, maybe Apple or Google for that matter, it's not going to be, you know, widespread, but certain markets perhaps. And they may want to partner with whomever is the local CSP. If you're looking for Africa, for instance, I think Facebook and other other players are very active in that area. So they might form some partnerships and they start deploying some MEC-like type of services. I think it's pretty, you know, I mean, it's very, very feasible. I mean,
well, I tend to disagree because, first of all, if you look at Facebook, when they mention connectivity, they want to connect people. They're not looking at what we actually mean as a communication service provider when we talk connectivity, the technical term connectivity. For them, it's something different. So that's number one. Also, it's actually a difficult business we're in. Investing in access is extremely expensive. And when you look at attempts of some of the players in the web scale space to build their own access and run their own fiber, it turned out to be difficult. So still, I don't want the operators to degenerate and just sell access, because I think this is not the best world to be in. I'd like the operator to be like the one I'm working for, like Deutsche Telekom, to serve more than just the access, because that's a value we are delivering, for example, in the security space to our customers.
Christos, you must feel the same, surely, from an operator viewpoint.
Well, I mean, as I say, you know, I mean, when it comes, I don't think like, you know, again, the players are going to start building their own infrastructure, right? That's very costly, but they can do partnerships, you know, at certain markets, and so they can leverage whatever infrastructure is out there. I think a lot of things are going to be around wireless and you know, 5G, of course. And I know, you know, we don't even know what what they're already planning with respect to how they're going to deploy that. I mean, the connected car is another area. You can think of something like an MVNO model for mobile edge computing. You can have like Ford or, you know, Nissan or Toyota or Mercedes or BMW, sort of like, you know, leveraging some of the, you know, that infrastructure. You know, with 5G, network slicing is going to be enabled, so that can be another factor to consider when you're talking about mobile computing. I don't know. I mean, I don't have like a crystal ball here to see, you know, with certainly what's going to happen. But to me, these look like all potential, you know, things that, you know, the over-the-top players can pursue.
Sanjay, with your red hat on, as it were, what's your take on that?
Well, on what you just said, it's interesting. The network slicing piece, everybody's talking about it. It's a new feature of 5G. Everyone's, oh, we're going to do network slicing. Great. But what I think what we forget is that while the standards around network slicing are pretty much done, you know, the physical layer, nobody's really gone and figured out all the other layers to get it back to the cloud. So if I go and deploy an application to service that mobile device, that application has no way to have a slice inside its data center network that corresponds to the same quality of service as the network slice that I'm getting out at the edge. So what's the point of the slice, right? So we need standards, probably some modifications in a number of open source projects, whether it's OpenStack, whether it's Kubernetes, whether it's, you know, a whole bunch of them, in order to get that whole pathway from the data center all the way out to the edge and all the way out to the 5G environment to be fully sort of built out from an API perspective.
Yeah, but that's why we're moving data center towards the edge, right? In order to address this problem. So
even if you move to the edge, you still need the API there. The API
yeah, the API is going to be there, right? But
it's not there.
Well, I know that today, right? But there might be also a multitude of APIs. So
well,
that's always the case.
But that's where the issue comes in, right? I mean, we need to drive the open source community to see this as a problem and something that needs to be solved.
And I think that's one of those key values that the operators have, is the service assurance or quality of solutions that they can offer and bring to the market. And bringing it all the way out to the edge is going to just exacerbate it, because you've got so many distributed small data centers, large ones, they're all over. And how do you make sure that the user experience from location A and location B is the same, and the enterprise, who could be a global enterprise, is willing to pay across that network? I think that's key differentiation that the comm service providers have. The question is how they get paid for it.
Well,
right? How they can make the money
and do it efficiently, because I mean, if you look at the OTT providers and how they do it today, I mean, they don't have APIs to do this, so they flood the network and see, well, what sticks. Well, now from
bandwidth to solve the problem.
Now, from your guys' perspective, that's not great, right? Because every time someone starts the application, well, it's going and flooding and seeing how much will fit, right? So it's almost better if, I mean, could there be some way it could query and figure out intelligently, well, I've got, this much. I mean, okay, YouTube has a selector, but how many people go and down-res themselves, right? I mean, people aren't going to do that, right? So
sure, there are lots of technical issues which still need to be addressed. So we already discussed security, the orchestration, the automation.
Yeah.
These are all topics I think the industry has to address, and it's tightly related to that overall discussion on development towards cloud native, orchestration of containerized solution. That's missing really still in the industry. And here we need to act indeed fast, because otherwise others are grabbing the space. And that is the difficulty. Just look at the struggle this industry has to agree even on one orchestration strategy. Yeah.
Okay. You touched on, actually before, briefly on NFV and the fact that it's taken longer, perhaps, than anticipated for it to reach maturity, as it were. Part of that surely is because of the struggle there has been between perceived or real proprietary standards and open source and open standards in general. Are we seeing the game being replayed yet again with MEC? Is it just once more around the block? Are we going to see that same old fight?
I think it's still the same issue we're facing, and I think it's related to maybe also a lack of understanding of the open source ecosystem still among many of the players here in this space. Now it's a great opportunity for companies like Red Hat, for example, but the industry overall, I think, still has to do the homework here.
Alex, you've been quiet for a while.
Yeah, I'll say, I think in part the lesson of NFV has sunk in to some extent with people who are working on MEC in terms of the importance of interaction and engagement with open source community and vice versa. I also think that MEC can be, in that aspect, a somewhat simpler problem in the sense that you can take small incremental steps in MEC, whereas with NFV, if you're going to transform your network into a virtualized network, you really have to have a lot of those pieces up front, otherwise it won't work. With MEC, you can figure out strategies where you deploy edge compute and you kind of take incremental steps, because that helps in many aspects, right? It helps with just looking at the investment that a CSP has to make and say, hey, how much do I really how much do I have to invest before I start seeing anything? It also helps with the transformation part, and you've mentioned it's not the technological transformation, it's the processes and the people transformation that turns out to be much more difficult than the technology. Well, if you have ways of doing it incrementally, you can also ease that part as well. So I think there's a good chance we'll see the story of MEC evolve somewhat differently. And I said, in large part, because the lesson of NFV has sunk in and people don't want to repeat it, but also because with MEC there's opportunities to do it differently that are not necessarily present when you're thinking about NFV.
I think they've also learned a bit, right, from the past, that they have to engage more in the community.
Well, yes, but I mean the fundamental problem, though, with engagement with open source community is open source community, like standards community, is completely contribution driven. Yeah. You can go to an open source organization, and in my capacity as chair of MEC, I'm having some very good conversation with the OpenStack folks, and they're very, very productive conversations, right? But at the end of the day, what OpenStack does about the edge is going to very heavily depend on who contributes code. Yeah. What MEC does is going to very heavily depend on who brings in contributions. That's a dilemma that's, I think, ultimately solvable when the same companies start addressing both communities, and we do still have a situation where the telco community's way of doing business is leans much more towards traditional telco standards. The OTT web scale leans much more towards open source. What's different and is encouraging on the partnership side is, at least in this part, there is a recognition that you really need a partnership at both sides. So to the extent that we have the kinds of industry partnerships like TIP that provide those opportunities, that they should help alleviate some of that problem as well.
Yeah, you're pointing out one important challenge the operators are actually facing. Hiring open source developers is not the easiest thing for us as operators, because the operators are just not the most attractive employers for open source developers. And likewise, having worked for one of the vendors in the industry for 13 years, even the vendors are not the most attractive place for open source developers to join these days. Yeah, that's why Red Hat sure has a great position in the industry, and so do some of the others. But this is the challenge we are facing. Yeah, even if we would want to contribute, it's not done overnight, because it's a cultural change we need to go through to actually be attractive again for those developers.
It's organizational change, and I think at Red Hat we realized that. You know, our CEO continually talks about, even wrote a book about organizational change, right? I mean, it's not the top-down command and control anymore, and it's more flat, and that's how organizations are going to operate in the future.
I'm going to open the floor up for questions in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to ask one more question of the panel though before we do, which is this. As a journalist, I can't count the number of times that I have either read or have written or have said or have been told that CSPs remain lumbering behemoths and they need to become fleet of foot. And I don't know whether that's happening or not. You hear various reports from various places. But what I'd like to ask you is this. Are CSPs able to articulate and implement an MEC strategy now that they can see a point in doing and they have an end goal in sight? Or are they doing short-term tactical stuff to launch a few applications and make a few quid or a few dollars? and well, you've all gone very dumb.
Well, you know, my intelligence left, but you're using the term not speaking. Okay. You know, from my view, I don't think that the entire market is you know, slowed down or behemoth from that manner. There are some comm service providers who move quite quickly, but they've also figured out how they do that. You know, working with partners and how they get that technology in very quickly. I think I heard an example this morning with the Reliance Jio. I don't know if anybody's here from Reliance Jio, but wow, what a fascinating, the entire network they have is virtualized, and they added 100 million subscribers in 6 months. That's huge. To be able to do that and to turn all that and be able to manage. Now push that all the way out to distributed cloud architecture, that's a different story. And we have a huge challenge, I think, on the development, DevOps side of things, to get the comm service providers to move that quickly. I can count probably 5 or 6 in the world, and I won't mention any because I may offend some, who'll be left on that list who can do that. And the rest won't. They just don't have the funds, they don't have the people, they don't have the capability to be able to go off and do that, and they're going to have their partners. You know, and it puts them into a marketing realm of they own the end user, but they really don't understand their own technology, which is really scary when an over-the-top guy knows his technology.
Well, it's not like the whole industry is stuck in Stone Age and is still using Stone Age axes. Okay, we are magenta, so maybe our axis would be magenta. But no, we are actually up for laser swords. And, but not the whole industry is leading on the innovation side. And sure, that's good as well for the ones driving technical innovation. And I don't see it bad if the industry at large is a little bit slower. It gives an opportunity as well to the innovation leaders.
Christos, what do you think?
I think they would be forced to come up with a strategy sooner or later. So it's better if you start thinking about it, if you're like a service provider, to start thinking about it, you know, right now, especially with standards efforts going on. Because if you wait to react, it might be too late. As certain companies, when when the cloud happened, for instance, and you have to sort of like catch up. This is a very fast-moving tech world that we live in. So I think it's better if they start planning today, even if the standards are not there yet. I know there's a bunch of a few actually vendors out there that are pursuing that, and I think it's going to be very disruptive, as technology at the end. But as I said, you better start early, sort of coming up with a strategy and doing some planning, and look at the use case that you think that you might be able to monetize on, rather just wait to react until the very late. So when I say there might be forces, because you might have a customer or you may have a partner that says, hey, I want to do that. So you should be ready to react to this thing. I think the analogy for me personally is like SD-WAN, sort of defined wide area networking. That is sort of like emerged as a killer app for SDN and NFV in a way, and now everybody is trying to react to that. I think MEC might evolve in something like that. I don't know.
I will say, I think the way you asked the question was kind of like, well, do they have a strategy, or are they just going to do it tactically? From where I see things, I think most CSPs today do not yet have a fully formed strategy, but they do understand that this is an area that they have to approach strategically, just because of the importance and the size of the investment that's going to be involved and going to be necessary to really get to the endpoint. So that understanding is there, and I think from what I see, everybody is working towards that strategy. Now that strategy, there may be the first few kind of tactical moves that are going to look tactical and opportunistic at the beginning that you're going to see, but I think by and large they're going to be driven by a strategy. Now, as far as the operators being slow behemoths, I think there's a variety. There's clearly a variety, like in any industry, but I also think every time operators get compared to how fast a Google or an Amazon moves, there's two things that come to my mind. First of all, Microsoft today moves a lot slower than they used to. And for better or worse, that seems to be the natural progression of the life of the companies. They're kind of like people. As they age, they just slow down. But the other aspect of it is the operators have to work in the environment where there's significant breaks on how fast they can move. They have regulations that they have to deal with. They have customer expectations that are completely different than if you're providing content or services over the internet that they have to deal with. And all of those things are drags on how fast you can move in certain things. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to compare the speed of transformation of the operators to what some of the top web players can do. And there are some like Reliance that have shown that they can move really fast in this business when the right opportunities are there.
Let's bring Sanjay, because I want to open it up to the floor in a moment. But Sanjay, a quick final word from you on that question.
Well, first of all, I to the point you were bringing up, everyone needs to have an access at some point, right? And that access has to work. So, I mean, who's going to provide that? And if it's not going to be, I mean, as Axel was saying earlier, some of the web scale companies thought, well, why don't we just speed it up by doing it all ourselves and building our own fiber? Okay, seems logical, except they found out that it was, a difficult business, just as difficult as, and they realized, well, maybe it's better to partner and let them take the cost of that, right? So there's this natural segmentation, but that natural segmentation leads to a difference in how you operate the business, because the businesses are actually evaluated differently from a financial perspective, right? A dividend-paying business versus a high-growth business. So they're just different businesses. They operate differently, and that's just the way it is.
Okay, thank you. Let's open it to questions from the floor. I can't see anything. None of us can see anything much up here. But if anyone is down there with questions, please say who you are and where you're from before you ask the question. So, who'd like to start?
Hi, I can start. I'm Ansley Hamer. I'm with Accenture's cybersecurity practice, and I've got some questions as to where Internet of Things and the wireless service CSPs are heading as a whole, not only as a user, but also as somebody who's in the security consulting industry. Where do you think the security is going to play a role? Would it be in the products accessing, or is it going to be more so with the providers? Because right now it's a regulatory almost Wild West when it comes to security protocols. It's a different world out there, and it changes every day, very fast.
So obviously you first, Sanjay.
Yeah, I'll take it. Security is going to play a role everywhere, but I think the area where it's really not been looked at enough is on the devices themselves. There's a lot of people talk about the protocols, say let's make the protocol secure, let's put encryption on it, and let's do all that. Well, no matter how much encryption you put on the protocol, if I can break into the device and change what it's doing, well then
How powerful botnets.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So then, why are those devices attacked? Well, what operating system's running on it? Was it something that the developer downloaded off the internet and said, hey, it told his boss that, hey, I'm already done with the project? Or was it something that was thought through and carefully evaluated to a set of specifications, right? And I think those are questions that need to be asked when all of these devices are being developed and built, when these projects are being built. And sometimes not enough of those questions are asked. And honestly, sometimes not enough budgets are being allocated to things like this.
I'll say the top level answer is everywhere. Security has to be done everywhere. I do think that security of the devices And I'll add, when you think about devices, it's the devices out in particular with IoT out in the field, and IoT is especially scary, right? But it's also the devices that run things back in the network, the servers and the storage, and really thinking, I think for a long time, security was being thought of as, well, yes, hey, let me encrypt my protocol. Well, okay, so now we moved on to devices. Well, let me make sure that it's booting properly, right? All of these are kind of cyber security, right? Computer communications security stuff. You really need to start going beyond that. What happens to my device while it's being shipped? If the security is kind of a game of economics, and so if the economics of an attack that can be perpetrated by doing something to the device while it's moving from a factory to its eventual customer is sufficiently high, somebody is going to perpetrate that attack, right? So I think you need to start thinking about security that way. And I think what the other piece that's missing is we've kind of been looking, I think, at security in terms of what can we do to completely stop something. When you think about the way people think about security, you look for anomalous behavior, right? Is somebody doing something really weird? At what point do we start developing intelligence systems that don't replace but complement what we've done already and start saying, well, that's tough. That's tough at the edge. It's just not behaving the right way. I'm going to ignore it, or I'm going to do something else with it. I'm not going to let it perform the action that it is attempting to perform because it's just behaving weirdly. I think all of those pieces are going to have to come together. The more distributed a system is, the more dangerous it becomes to that kind of stuff. So I think MEC being distributed is going to start forcing this kind of stuff. And IoT, as heavily as it relies on MEC, is going to be even more dangerous because now you have distributed, but you also have the economics of the attack goes from I've deleted somebody's data or something to I've crashed an airplane or I've caused a 50-car collision on a highway because they're all self-driving cars and I hacked them.
Yeah. We need to consider we are running in edge computing critical infrastructure and partner applications on the same infrastructure in the future. And that requires new thinking indeed on the security models. Also overall, when we look at things like firewalls, today everything is kind of built on access control lists, old school. And well, if you think about cloud native, which will be used in edge computing, this is not the way which will work anymore. So you need to move to an identity-based system, for example. And where is the industry on that? At square one. So we're not there yet. But this is why security is one of the key focus areas if we want to really be successful with edge computing.
Another question.
This is Ajay from HP. I have a question regarding, we started off saying that we know who the winners are, at least in the US, in the cloud space, right? Mobile edge computing is probably the next frontier for operators. But I'd like to understand from your perspective, what do you think about the fact that operators are local, country specific, and the cloud players are more global brands, if you will. How does that work for developers? And what do operators think about this? Do they think it's partner to begin with, or are you going to go for it?
I think it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, essentially. So in some applications, for some certain things, we're going to maybe look for partners, whether it's on the vendor side or on the application or the software side. So I think it's going to vary. I don't think we're there yet in order to, and that goes back to the question about the strategy and the planning. I don't know whether Alex,
well,
you see
let
more
me
things
just
from
point
your
out
end.
one fact, that while the current cloud players are international, when you think about AWS, Google Cloud, et cetera, right? Edge clouds, by definition, are going to be localized. So that you don't have that issue.
We're running out of time. We've got time for one more question, though. So if there's one there, we'd be happy to hear it.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Sven, and I'm heavily involved in the universal CPE deployment for some of the service providers. And I'm just curious if are any thoughts on the universal CPE. Typically, you're running multiple VNFs, multiple applications on the same hardware platform. Could you envision that the service provider community sharing edge computing sites to running the same application and sharing these sites throughout the network?
Who would like to answer that one?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, sure. It's one of the options, and also, if you really think about the money which is required to move towards edge computing, definitely this is one of the possibilities. But again, someone needs to make a move, and it needs to be someone with the proper strategy in the space. It doesn't come out of the blue sky.
Yeah, I think one of the key things for them to open that up is to have a model around as you create applications that can fit into those edge sites. How do you describe the resources that those applications are using? Because there's limited resources, and today our models, whether our models for describing what a VM is or what a container is, they talk about the CPU and memory usage and storage usage, but they don't talk about the network usage. But then, yet when you talk about MEC, there's a lot of network usage, right? So we've got to evolve those models so that we can.
I will just make a point that some of the APIs that MEC has published, they have some of those elements in them.
We got to get them into the other open source projects.
Okay. I guess to build on that last point, though, a great question over there, Sven, is that all of those VNFs and being able to share it across, we think very confidently at Intel that we helped to make that happen. It's not an Intel architecture. It's running open OSs that helped it, the APIs that are coming along, all the things from enterprise are coming over. And so I'm sorry if some of you find that arrogant, but we've been working and investing billions of dollars to make that happen. And so it's not an easy thing to drive that into the industry and to see that transition. Because if you can think back, when I first got into comms 20 years ago, it was a very different world. And to be able to think now where we have a flexible software-defined architecture and pooling of resources, whether it's compute, storage, or networking, which is coming, but is the slowest, I have to agree with that. I think that's the way the industry is going, and if it doesn't continue to embrace that, they're going to get left behind. So that software-defined infrastructure and how you work across and put all those VNFs, whether you're moving them onto a phone, which isn't where Intel is, but we want to be, and then all the way back to the cloud. It's a great way to look at how do you take advantage of your software architecture to be able to move across a ubiquitous hardware environment.
Thank you. Now, last thing we're going to do is I want each of you in turn to, in less than a minute, I was going to bang on this or hit you across the knees or something, and if you go on too long, just if you would encapsulate for us what you think has, whether or not your mind has been changed on anything from what we've heard today, and where you think multi-access edge computing is now and where it's going to go next. And we may as well start with you, Keith. We'll just go straight along to the end.
I just spoke quite a bit, but
you did, but you can do it again.
I would say that, one, being on this panel and listening to these great experts in this area gives me a lot of hope for the comm service providers. I think they know the challenge. They've got an understanding of where their differentiated value is, what they can take advantage of, and these partnering. I love to hear that term because I think it does move the industry faster, and they don't want to necessarily just hold it to themselves. And so open it up and let the creativity of an open community really expand what you can do on your network.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely, right now, edge computing is a great opportunity, and we need to work hard on making it reality. So.
Short and sweet, Christos.
Yeah, for me, I view MEC as the edge hanging fruit, if you like. And we, you know, as I've said, we're going to be forced either by, you know, practical application to get into this space, especially if we see some monetization aspects.
Sanjay.
It's going to open up a whole world of opportunity for microservices-based applications, move it beyond theory into real-world application.
I'll say that from my point of view, for anyone that believes in 5G, and 5G as in the applications that 5G will deliver, you necessarily believe in edge compute. By whatever name you're going to call it, there is going to be compute, Intel-based architecture at the edge delivered in HP boxes. It will be there, otherwise those 5G applications will not be there. I think the challenge for the industry is not whether it will be there, but how we get it there and how we get it there in a way that makes sense for the industry. And I think I really do think that the parameters or the way this is going to work out has the potential to work out very, very differently than the way cloud has worked out, because the starting point is very different. So I'm kind of excited to see how it plays out.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. I'd just like to say, what a great panel. These people know some stuff. It's been very entertaining. I've enjoyed myself. I hope you have, and I hope you have out there. We can't see, but thank you for being here as well. And would you please show your appreciation in the usual way?